Great, people are starting to come in, so I'll launch our first poll and you can tell us where you are joining us from today and what's your background if you're interested. If you prefer, you can also introduce yourself in the chat. We'll start the presentation and the webinar pretty shortly. There's not surprisingly quite a lot of information that we're hoping to share with you today. Just give everybody a couple of minutes. You can see the numbers going up, which is great.
I was trying to sign in with my own account.
Right, we have someone, we have Shelly from BCG Biggs Edmonton. Stacy is joining us as well from the Mentor Canada team. All right, I will end this poll, and not surprisingly, a lot of you are mentoring service providers with us today, but I'm glad to see that we have other people in attendance who think that, oh, I didn't share the results. Now you can see them. So welcome everyone. I am Véronique Church-Duplessis. I am the Director of Research and Evaluation for Mentor Canada, and I've been leading the State of Mentoring research project for Mentor Canada for the past year and a bit. So it's been a long journey, and it's been very, very exciting. And I will launch our presentation so you can follow along. It's easier to remember statistics and numbers when you have access to them during the presentation. Let me see, I want to make sure I have everything in front of me. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I did add some time to answer questions throughout the presentation. Jessica will help me monitor those questions. And let's get started. There's so much to cover. So before we start, I would like to acknowledge that as we gather here virtually, we are acknowledging that this sacred land on which we work and reside since time immemorial has been cared for and occupied by Indigenous peoples. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I personally am located on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 13. I'm in Toronto, for those of you wondering. And Mentor Canada, the team, we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in these communities and on these traditional territories all across Canada. We also recognize the contributions and enduring presence of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people across Canada, whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich our shared heritage. So for those of you who are not familiar with Mentor Canada, we are a coalition of organizations that provide youth mentoring. We were launched by Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada, the Alberta Mentoring Partnership, and the Ontario Mentoring Coalition. Working together, our goal is to build sector capacity and empower every young person to fulfill their potential. So that brings us to the crux of the matter, really what we'll be talking about today, which is this big research project that we undertook called the State of Mentoring in Canada. The research project had 3 distinct studies, and we will be going over some key findings from each of these studies today. The goals of the State of Mentoring in general were really to get a better understanding of people's experiences with mentoring, particularly youth mentoring across Canada, identify gaps and opportunities to build sector capacity, and also eventually track progress over time. The 3 studies we undertook, the first one was called Mapping the Gap, looking at understanding young people's access to mentoring and their mentoring experiences, understand who might face barriers in accessing mentoring as well. The second study was called Capturing the Mentoring Landscape, and that one looked at mentoring programs and services across the country. How common are they? What are their scopes? Who are they serving? What are their structures? What are their strengths? What are the challenges that they're facing? And finally, the Raising the Profile of Mentoring study really looked at the general population's opinions about youth mentoring and their experiences and willingness to become mentors to young people outside of their immediate family. Let me see, here we go. I was losing the chat. Now I have it, so I can follow along if anyone asks question in there, but it's easier for us to track them if you put them in the Q&A. So I encourage you to do that if that's, if you have any questions along the way. I know it's pretty dense information, so please, if anything requires clarification or if you want more in-depth information, please use the Q&A function. I just provided you with a little bit of an overview of the methodology for each of those studies. I'll go over that pretty quickly since there's more information about this in our full reports. But overall, we did two big surveys that had several hundreds of respondents, either for the youth survey or the adults survey about their opinions on mentoring and their experiences as mentors. We conducted all of this work in collaboration with the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, a nonprofit research organization that has about 30 years experience in the youth and policy field. These studies were also inspired by some work that had previously been done by Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership in the US, and the Alberta Mentoring Partnership in Canada. So we're grateful for their willingness to share their insights and experience with us. So we have already a question about how we will be sharing this with the attendees. The recording of this webinar will be put on our website, as well as the slide decks. And then I will share more information about how you can access more detailed information about each of these studies, including the executive summaries that are already available if you haven't already consulted them. Jessica, I think, will help us and help me by sharing the link to these studies in the chat, so you can consult those if you want. And there will be more tools that I will share with you along the way. So let's take a breath before we jump into the first study, which is called Mapping the Mentoring Gap, and looked at young people's mentoring experiences. So to help people get a common understanding of what we meant by mentors and formal mentoring and informal mentoring, for all of these studies, we provided definitions that we developed in collaboration with our research advisory committee to make sure to integrate some cultural perspectives and various ideas and definitions in there. And we use those definitions afterwards to create our categories of analysis and looking at young people's access to mentoring in general. So that includes any type of mentoring, any person considered a mentor, including natural or informal mentors, as well as formal mentors that they would have access through a formal structured mentoring program. And then the second category, which is, as you can see, a subset here of the any mentor category, which is the formal mentoring category. That one refers specifically to young people's experiences through a formal structured mentoring program. So let me launch the second poll here. So you can give us a little bit, oh, here I was sharing that all along. Let's launch the poll. And here we go. Kind of to help us think about access to mentors and how it might have changed over time. How about you share with us, if you're willing, if you had a mentor while you were growing up at some points between the ages of 6 to 18, or if you didn't, or if you can't recall, you know, that happens sometimes. And then the second question is, can you recall a time when you were growing up when you didn't have a mentor, but you wished you had one? Great, the votes are coming in rather quickly, which is great to see. Give people a couple more seconds to answer. While we do that, I'll share some information about what we found in our survey of young adults. So we surveyed young adults between the ages of 18 to 30 and asked them to tell us about their experiences while they were growing up. So particularly their experiences between the ages of 6 to 18. What we found is that overall, just over half of all those respondents who participated in our survey, they recalled having one person they would consider a mentor. And then from that group of 56% of respondents who had been mentored, about a third of those mentored youth had a formal mentor through a formal mentoring program. That means about 16% of the whole sample of all the respondents, if we look at them overall. And we also found that the proportion of young men and young women who had access to mentors while growing up was pretty consistent overall. It was a 0.2 or 0.3% difference, so not significant here. So let me share the results here. So see, this is really interesting because the numbers are quite close to what we will see during this presentation today. About 58% of you recalled having a mentor while you were growing up. So quite close to what we also found in our study. And let me stop. 48% who recalled a time when you did not have a mentor but wish you had one, which is a little bit lower than what we found. So you'll hear about that in a second. All right. So where are we? Here we go. We also looked at some demographic factors and how that might influence young people's ability to access mentoring while they were growing up. And we found that some groups were statistically more or less likely to have access to mentors. We found that Indigenous respondents were more likely to have access to a mentor, as were young people with a functional disability. So that doesn't require a professional diagnosis. It's a self-reported disability. And young people who experienced at least one risk factor while growing up were also more likely to reporting having access to at least one mentor while they were growing up. We found that respondents who identified as non-binary, so their gender identity as being non-binary, they were less likely to have access to a mentor while they were growing up. All right, let's see. Now, we also looked at who had access to formal mentoring through the programs we talked about earlier, and certain groups were more likely to have participated in mentoring programs while they were growing up. Again, Indigenous young people were more likely to have participated in programs than non-Indigenous young people. Transgender youth were more likely to have participated than cisgender youth. Racialized youth were more likely to have participated in the mentoring program than white youth. Young men and boys were also more likely to have participated in mentoring programs than young girls and young women. And young people who experience at least one risk factor were also more likely to have participated in a formal mentoring program. So let me see if there's anything in the chat. I seem to have lost it again. Here we go. Okay, looks good. Another key question we explored in our youth survey was this question of unmet needs, whether or not young people could recall a time when they were growing up, when they wished they had a mentor, but didn't have one. And you've just answered that question, right? 48% of you said that you recalled at least one time when you wished you had that support, but didn't have it. In our survey across the ages of 6 to 18, it was over half of the young people who participated who could recall a time when they didn't have a mentoring relationship, when they wished they had one. And we also found that young people who had at least one mentor at some point while they were growing up also said that there were other times when they might not have had that relationship, but wish they had others. And again, there's a couple of groups of demographic groups where we found they were more likely to report unmet needs in terms of access to mentors. That includes LGBTQ2S+ youth, youth who have a functional disability, and youth who experienced risk factors while they were growing up. And we probed a little bit deeper, asked a couple of questions about what barriers young people faced when they tried to access mentors but couldn't. So overall, it's about 38% of the survey respondents who said that they faced a barrier accessing a mentor during their teenage years. We only asked that question for the period between the ages of 12 to 18 because of questions of recall bias and all that. We felt it was a bit more accurate to focus on that period. The most common barrier these young people encountered was not knowing how to find a mentor and not understanding what mentoring was or the value of having a mentor. And the third most common barrier is not knowing about any mentoring programs in their regions or not having them being available to them. So the last big question that I wanted to cover with you today, there's more in the report and I'll tell you about that in a second. But the last research question I wanted to cover with you today was how do outcomes compared for young people who were mentored compared to young people who were not mentored, right? So we asked them to reflect upon their lives. We asked the survey respondents to reflect upon their lives as young adults, so their current situation, and we compared their results between youth who had been mentored and those who hadn't. So on the left here, you can see the positive outcomes associated with having been mentored in general. So whether you had an informal mentor, a formal mentor, or both, all of these positive outcomes, we were able to establish a statistical association or correlation between having access to mentors and these outcomes. So better self-rated mental health, a stronger sense of belonging with their local communities, high school completion and further education after high school, having an occupation. So young people who had been mentored were more likely to either be employed or studying or both, as opposed to doing neither of those. And we also found something that I think many of you today already know. Young people who have been mentored are more likely to be interested in serving as mentors in the future, and they're also more likely to have already served as mentors to others. Now, if we look specifically at the outcomes associated with having participated in a formal mentoring program, we found that as young adults, young people who had participated in the formal mentoring program also reported better self-rated mental health, also reported a stronger sense of belonging. They were also more likely to have an occupation. And again, same thing as we saw before with this continued commitment to mentoring with their interest in serving as a mentor or having already mentored others. So I'm going to take a second here to go over some of the key takeaways from our youth research, and then we can open it up for a couple of questions before moving on to the other two studies. So overall, it's 42% of young adults in Canada who grew up without the support of a mentor. Young adults who did have a mentor growing up report several positive outcomes compared to non-mentored peers. And we also found that young people often want or need more than one mentor. So as I said earlier, we found that youth who said, yes, you know what, I had at least one mentor, but I still had unmet needs when it comes to access to mentors. So it's a bit more complicated than making sure every young person has one mentor at some point in their life, right? There's a trend here where we see that once a young person has a supportive mentoring relationship, they show interest in more supportive mentoring relationships. So just a couple of things that I haven't covered today because of time. If you look at our executive summary and the full report, which is coming out by the end of next week, hopefully, there's a couple more things that you can learn about in those reports and summaries, including the dynamics of the mentoring relationships for the young people who were mentors. So how did mentors support youth? How did they meet? For how long did the relationship last? What did they talk about? And so on. And you can also learn a lot more about our qualitative findings, because as part of this study, we conducted interviews with 19 young people. The qualitative findings are incredibly rich, and I didn't really have the time to cover them today, but there's a webinar where we covered that in the past. The recording is available on our YouTube channel and on our Knowledge Hub, and I think Jessica will be able to share the link with you in a moment in the chat. So that's one thing you can do. You can read those reports, consult those summaries, and then learn a lot more about our findings. And we've also created this interactive dashboard. The link has already, Jessica has already shared the link. Some of you already know about this resource. It's a really neat little tool that we created that answers 3 of the main research questions we just discussed. Who has access to mentors in general? Who has access to formal mentors, and who reports unmet needs with regards to access to mentors. And you can look at these findings for different provinces and regions across Canada. You can look at the findings based on the gender identity of the respondents, including for many cases at the provincial or regional level. And you can also look at, is there a difference between the older young adults and the younger young adults? So is there a change? Did we notice a change over the last couple of years, so that you can look at the age groups of the respondents who were either age 18 to 24 or 25 to 30. So if you want to go play with the dashboard a little bit, I can answer questions about that now or later as well. So let's take a couple of seconds to see if there are any questions so far. I know it's a lot of information. All right, it seems that I've been very, very clear so far. No questions yet. Well, there will be another opportunity to answer questions along the way. So if anything comes to mind, please do share, and I'll be happy to address those questions. All right, the second study, Capturing the Landscape, which was about mentoring programs and services across Canada. We had 150 organizations who participated in the survey. They provided details about 215 youth mentoring programs that were offered across the country. And we found some interesting trends and things through our survey, including the fact that a lot of organizations tend to serve broad categories of young people. So 65% of the participating organizations serve the general youth population, and many targeted young people who were living in poverty, or young people who had mental health needs, or young people who were academically at risk. We also found that a lot of mentoring programs targeted young people under the age of 18. So they targeted children and youth, children and adolescents, as opposed to young adults. There's only a few programs that we found that were offered to young adults. Maybe it is a limit of our sample. Maybe those programs exist out there, but they didn't participate in our survey. So that's something we will have to explore more if that is the case. We also found that a lot of young people are waiting for mentors. So of those 150 organizations who participated in our survey, 54% had a wait list of young people who were waiting for mentoring services. The average number of young people on wait lists was 40, but we also had large wait lists that had over 800 young people on it. We also found that the proportion of young men and boys waiting was greater than the numbers of young girls and young women who were waiting. And given that organizations tend to serve those young people, it's not really surprising to find that a large proportion of young people on wait lists are young people who have mental health needs, are academically at risk, or are living in poverty. We looked at the outcomes or the goals of these young youth mentoring programs, and a lot of them focused on broad outcomes such as providing a developmental relationship or general youth development when it comes to programs, particularly that were serving young people under the age of 18. When we look specifically at programs serving young adults, career exploration and employability or job readiness were the most common outcomes for these programs. About a third of those programs reported that as one of their top outcomes. And we also looked at what challenges organizations were facing when it comes to their operations and their program delivery. The four most common challenges in the operational side include program growth and scaling, fundraising and grant writing, program sustainability, and program evaluation and data collection. And in the full report, you'll be able to find out more about what are the top challenges for larger organizations versus smaller organizations, because there are small differences here that might be of interest to you. When it comes to the program delivery challenges, there's a clear front runner, and that is mentor recruitment. So here we see that 39% of organizations reported mentor recruitment as their top challenge. If we go down to the second most important challenge, we add another, I think, 11% of organizations. So it ends up being a top two challenge for over half of the organizations that participated in our survey. That is confirming really what a lot of us already know. Mentor recruitment is a challenge for organizations across the country. So a couple of key takeaways for the Capturing the Landscape study. Mentoring programs are more common for children and teenagers than young adults, or at least from the sample of responses we collected. Organizations tend to serve broader categories of young people. But if we go from the organizational level to the program level and look at individual programs, since an organization can offer more than one mentoring program, we see a bit more specificity at the program level. So about half of mentoring programs target specific groups of young people. And finally, that one emerged very clearly. The demand for mentoring programs exceed most organizations' capacity to serve young people. And mentor recruitment is particularly pronounced challenge. So those are just some key highlights from the Capturing the Landscape study. There's a couple more things you can learn about by looking at the executive summary or the full report, including details about the size and structure of organizations, the number of young people they're serving, the size and structure of mentoring programs, as well as who are the mentors in those programs and how they are supported. And you can learn more too about the quality of mentoring programs across the country. So just before we move into the last study, I'm going to take a second to see if there are any questions. Seems good so far, so we'll save the questions for the end. We're getting there pretty quickly. Suggestions on how to attract mentors. That's exactly the point of our last study. So we're going to start this discussion with the findings from our Raising the Profile study, and then we can add more details at the end if we haven't already answered that question. So overall, we found that adults across Canada are very supportive of youth mentoring. 79% of them believe that mentoring relationships are important for young people when they're growing up. Over 4 out of 5 agree that youth mentoring not only benefits young people, but our whole society, including the top benefits that they perceive being improved mental health for our society, reduced violence or antisocial behavior, and healthier intergenerational relationships. Our respondents also agree that more than 4 out of 5, more than 4 out of 5 respondents agree that young people need more mentors so that they can be more successful in adulthood, and overall agree that government should invest to support mentoring. So those are very positive findings. In a time when people can be a little bit divided, there's strong agreement on the importance and the place of mentoring as a tool to help our young people across the country. Oh, there's a poll here. Let me just, that's why I put reminders. See, I'm just going to launch our third poll and see here that will give us a little bit of context for our some of the findings from our Raising the Profile study. Right, while you vote, I'll share some of our findings. So we asked quite a large number of adults across Canada if they had mentored a young person, right? So our sample for this study is 3,500 adults from all across the country. And we found that 69% of them had never been a mentor, but 31% had. So about a third of Canadians have some experience as a mentor, and 8% of them were currently mentoring a young person, or they had done so in the last 12 months. That's how we define current. It's within the last 12 months. And we did that survey in September and October of 2020, so quite recently. Formal mentoring experience was rarer than informal mentoring experience, which is not surprising, I think, for anyone in this field, but still interesting that about 10% of all respondents had at some point experience in a formal mentoring program, right? So that 10% includes current and past mentors. So let's see here. Well, you're skewing my results a little bit, I guess, with this audience. That's predictable, but 82% of you say that you have mentored a young person since you've become an adult, and that is great, right? We need more mentors. And we have, we have about over 50% of you have experience as a formal mentor, which is, again, higher than what we found in our national survey. Got to know your audience. All right, so we asked people who have never mentored why they haven't done so. And not surprisingly, time comes up as the most important challenge for them. They don't have time, or they report being too busy with their children. But there are a couple of things here that I think are useful for us to know, including that there's 27% of respondents who had never mentored. They said, I don't think I'm able to do it. I don't think I have the skills to do this. I don't think I'm equipped to respond to the needs of young people. And 1 in 5 person who has never mentored said they don't think they have anything to offer. So I think it points to the need for our society as a whole of raising awareness and increasing people's capacity to be mentors and help them develop their skills, and help them demystify some notions about what skills you need to be a mentor. And we heard from our interviews through the study that some people who are currently mentors didn't think they had anything to offer at first. They didn't think that they had their whole lives figured out. So they were like, oh, maybe I can't be a mentor. But then they learned that they could. They didn't need to be an end result to become a mentor. And the third theme we saw as to why people have never mentored is that they're not aware of it. They don't know about opportunities. They don't know that there is a need. They don't know the kids in their neighborhoods. So there's an awareness piece here that we can possibly work on and work on together. For those who had experience as mentors, current or past, we asked them what were the major reasons that motivated them to get involved. So the most common reason was to pass along knowledge, skills, experience with young people. So feeling that they have something to offer in this case. And interestingly here too, there's this theme that we will see again in a moment, but responding to a specific need as opposed to more general calls for support or help seems to be an effective way of motivating adults to step up and become mentors. And then we see a little less common, but still quite prominent for current and past mentors, values being there as motivators and this idea of giving back or paying it forward. So that's what we found for people who are currently mentoring or have mentored in the past. You will see we asked a similar question for those who have not mentored and might be persuaded to do so, and the results are a little bit different. So maybe we need different strategies to recruit new mentors as opposed to keeping current mentors and past mentors engaged. The second big research question we had for this study was looking at who might be likely or willing to mentor in the next 5 years. We put a time limit on the question as opposed to being completely hypothetical. Will you mentor at some point in your life is a bit different than, do you think you will mentor the next 5 years? It's a little more concrete and it helps people think about their current situation and whether or not they have the capacity. Oh, I see that my poll is still going. Apologies about that. So we found that 23% of people who were not currently mentoring would be likely to mentor a young person in the next 5 years. If we dig a little bit deeper here, among those 23% who would be likely to mentor in the next 5 years, a greater proportion of them are past mentors. So 35% of past mentors said, you know what, I might mentor again in the next 5 years, compared to only 19% of respondents who had zero mentoring experience. Again, certain identities had an influence on whether or not people had experience already as a mentor or they were likely to mentor in the next 5 years. You can find more details about that in our executive summaries if you're interested, or I can unpack this a little bit more in the Q&A if you're interested in that as well. One interesting finding is that you know, the people who are like, you know what, I'm definitely going to mentor in the next 5 years, it's a very small proportion of respondents who were ready to say that that was quite likely for them. People tend to be, as we often see with a 10-point scale, closer to the middle here. So let me get to the motivations. So we looked at the motivations for people who are already mentoring or people who had mentored in the past. And we asked the same question of people who had never mentored and asked them, what would it take? What would motivate you to mentor and step up? And these are a little bit different than what we saw for current and past mentors. Amongst the top 3 motivations are direct asks. So getting a young person or a young person's parents asking you to become their mentor were some of the leading motivations that could convince or persuade people who are not mentoring to become involved, to step up. And again, this theme of seeing a specific need was also a top motivation that might persuade people who are not mentoring to become involved. For this group, values are less important. You see them here. There's less than a quarter of respondents who are highlighting that values would motivate them to get involved. So values are a little bit more abstract and less motivating for this group than direct asks by young people or their parents, or specific requests and needs. Right, and we see some small differences between what would motivate men versus women to step up and become a mentor. Particularly, we saw that 58% of women said, you know what, if a young person asked me to mentor them, I would probably say yes, compared to 42% of men. So just before we open it up for discussion, a couple of key takeaways from this Raising the Profile study. There's broad support for youth mentoring amongst adults across Canada. And retaining current mentors or persuading past mentors to resume their involvement could be more effective than trying to recruit new mentors altogether, right? We saw that only 19% of respondents with no prior experience might be willing to mentor in the next 5 years. Direct requests by young people and caregivers might be an effective strategy to persuade mentors with no experience to become involved. And this last theme that we saw in a couple of, we saw in the barriers particularly, this idea that adults don't always feel empowered to step up, don't always have the confidence to step up and become mentors. So it's, they don't always think that they can help. So being able to give them access to tools and resources that can help them might help us recruit more mentors or persuade more mentors to persuade more adults to become informal mentors in their communities. A couple of things that you can learn more about in the executive summary and the full report include what are the demographic characteristics of the people who mentor, what are the demographic characteristics of the people who could be persuaded to mentor, whether informally or formally, what are the barriers that keep people from mentoring in a formal mentoring program, what are the benefits of mentoring for mentors and the perceived benefits for mentees, a couple more details about adults' experiences as mentors and the challenges they faced, and some notes about how respondents in these surveys and interview told us that we could better support mentors and equip them to fulfill that role. All right, let's open it up to questions. All right, I'm going to keep going, but please add questions to the Q&A if you have any. Be happy to elaborate on anything that I have presented here or clarify anything. Oh, there's one here. Any idea might boost, any ideas whether extrinsic awards might boost or help mentorship? So we heard that okay. A couple of people who had been mentors in the past and stopped mentoring told us that one thing that might have persuaded them to continue their involvement was more praise or recognition. So a lot of people who have stopped mentoring said the relationship just came to a natural end. So there's very little that could have been done to retain me as a mentor. But amongst that group, I think it was about 19%. I'm not sure about the percentage. I think that's what I recall. But there's a small proportion of them, we said more recognition, more praise would have helped, would have convinced me to stay involved, which highlights the importance of communicating impact and thanking and recognizing people for their contributions as mentors. And there's details about that in the full report. All right, anything else? All right, I'll keep going. And if anything else comes up, we still have time, so I can come back to anything here. All right, so this is the culmination of a year and a half of work. So there's a lot that will be coming out in the coming days and weeks. But there are other things that we're hoping to do going forward, including a sort of phase 2 of the state of mentoring, where we're hoping to look at particularly the outcomes we talked about earlier from the youth survey, look at the outcomes and whether or not they are the same or different for different subgroups, subpopulations, and if demographic characteristics have an influence on outcomes. We did this survey about mentoring programs and services, and we launched it right when COVID was starting, so not great timing on our part. But I think that one of our goals is to now look back and try to understand a little bit better how the pandemic impacted the mentoring sector overall. Now there's another question. Do you have data regarding the types and program models that are available in Canada or specific regions, one-to-one, community-based, youth mentoring, or peer mentoring, or school-based peer mentoring? So we have some details about the structures of mentoring programs in our in the full report from the Capturing the Landscape. One-to-one mentoring, about half of all mentoring programs use that model, but we also saw that group mentoring is becoming quite important. There's over 20% of programs that use a group mentoring model, community-based, school-based. So we have some information about program types. Sometimes it's hard to determine if it's school-based or community-based, but we have some information about whether it's an academic enrichment program or a general youth development program. And we have some details about where the programs are delivered and where mentors and mentees meet. And I'm trying to find quickly some more details because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but schools really do play an important role in mentoring across Canada. It's a common meeting location for mentors and mentees, and a lot of programs have something to do with school, whether it's with their goals or outcomes or their program type, right? So if we're looking at program types, the most common types that we saw through our study, out of school enrichment programs. So 43% of the programs that participated in our survey were out of school enrichment programs, and 35% of them were in school enrichment programs. And the third most common type of program was career readiness or youth employment program. That was 21% of programs that were career readiness types of programs. Yes, so those are some of the details that we have, and you can find out more about them in our executive summaries and the full reports as well. All right, let's keep. Great. So what's next? So I mentioned the full reports. We are just waiting on the translations right now. All 3 reports will be available in the coming days. Really, we're getting quite close to being able to release them. You'll be able to find them on our website, on our Knowledge Hub, or in our works section. So all 3 reports will be there. We'll mention it too in our newsletters when they're available. And we're also convening some key sector stakeholders in the coming days to really look at these findings and understand what they mean for policy and practice, and help us co-create a set of calls to action and recommendations for the youth mentoring sector across Canada. And once we have draft recommendations and calls to action, we will be sharing those very broadly with the sector. So you'll have an opportunity to tell us what you think about these. We really want them to be relevant and actionable for people in the youth mentoring sector, ourselves included. And I have one last poll, I believe, which I will try to remember to close afterwards. All right, here, this is already a question about how we can best support you, thinking about what tools can we develop to share these findings and make them useful for you. The reports are long, and I know that it's not always convenient for everyone to go and read those long reports. So what types of tools can be most helpful for you? What are the ones that you're most likely to use? All right, we see a lot of love for infographics, and that's great. I love them too. They're very concise ways of conveying a lot of useful information. Right, I'll give you a chance to finish voting and then share the results. So now thinking about what you can do, we've done all of this research and we've done it hopefully to support the youth mentoring field more effectively. So there will be a 2-question post-webinar survey. I promise it will take 30 seconds. If you're able to complete it, it will help me understand what was useful or not in today's webinar. Most importantly, we hope that you can make use of these findings. All right, let's see. What tools, infographics really come out at the top, webinars, dashboard, video capsules, excellent. So we'll probably do a mix of all of these things in the, right, here we go, share the results, and I'll close this in a second. So we'll develop a whole number of tools to help you access this information in a convenient way in the coming weeks and months. So we hope that you can make use of this information, use of the dashboard, the executive summaries, and everything else to support your work and your advocacy and your grant proposals. Tell us how you're using it if you have a chance. Tell us how we can improve the tools to better support you and your work. If you have a group or if you want us to present those findings to your staff, feel free to make that request. We're happy to go where people are at to bring those findings to them. And you know, we'll share the draft recommendations and calls to action that we develop as part of our forum next week. We will be sharing those with the sector in the coming weeks. So if you have some input, we would welcome it. We really want to make sure that these are actionable and make sense for everyone in the sector, and we can't do this without you. So there we go. We still have time for questions. If you have any questions, I'm putting this there so you can have my email if there's anything, since it's not a particularly short email. You can also find me on our website if you want to email me. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. Let's see. We still have some time, so maybe I can go and stop sharing this PowerPoint, and maybe we can go and have a look at the dashboard so you can have a better idea of how it works. It'll take me a second here. Please be patient. In the meantime, if anything else comes up, please use the chat or the Q&A. All right, I'm here. Here we go. So here's the dashboard. If you have not already used it, there's a little bit of context about the state of mentoring, some key findings, and definitions of what you can access or not on that dashboard. So the 3 research questions and the parameters around the data that is shown. And then there's a bit of detail about the different characteristics that you can use to navigate this dashboard, location, gender identity, and age. And we provided some context to help you understand what that means. So if you get to this part, you see the total sample. So that's the sample across Canada, all respondents of all ages and all genders. That's the information we have about who had access to a mentor, who had access to a formal mentor, and who had unmet needs. Now, what we can do is compare by gender if we want. Across Canada, we see that 56.1% of women reported having access to a mentor while they were growing up, compared to 55.6% of men. So it's a 0.5% difference, not very big. When we look at formal mentoring here, of the mentored youth, only 24% of women had a formal mentor through a program, compared to 39% of young men. And same thing for unmet needs, right? We see that women have slightly higher unmet needs across Canada compared to men. So that was if we did it by gender, then now we can look at comparing different regions in Canada. So that can give you access to some very quick data about your region. And if you click here to expand, then you have a lot of those categories again, looking at, for example, access by gender in Alberta. So you can add as many columns to this as you want. It becomes a little overwhelming, maybe if you're not used to it after a while. So just you can just play with it and see more detailed information about your region and the young people in your region. So I'll stop sharing now. Great. So I don't see any other questions. I will share my email in the chat. And if you have anything, please feel free to reach out to me after the webinar. And I want to really thank you all for attending today, and hope that these reports and summaries and findings will be useful for you as you conduct your work. Oh, we have a question about whether or not we're doing this in French as well. Yes, I have an event next week in partnership with Mentorat Québec. So it will be a little bit shorter than this in terms of going over the research findings, because there's a bit more of a discussion following the research findings at that event. But on May 18th, I actually have the link right here. I can share the link for the French event. So if you're interested in the French event, please register for the 18th, and we will see you there. Otherwise, I'm sure there will be more, you will be hearing more from us in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone.